Hey everybody, Kyle here. I've now had my Nikon Z6 camera for a good 3 weeks now. I feel like I've really put it through its paces. So I have a project where video is going to be a very critical part of it. And as an artist, aesthetics are important. And the high def from this is just really ugly. I was pretty much seriously thinking about getting a GH5 when I found out about this thing, and then I was like, well, I don't have to worry about adapters and new lens lines and all that kind of stuff. This gives me everything I was thinking of with that other system. It does feel like a fundamentally different device to me than a DSLR, if that sounds strange. A DSLR seems like a camera first that just happens to use electronic digital technology to make picture taking happen. Whereas the mirrorless camera really does feel like a data processing unit through and through. I found this camera I didn't have to tweak the settings as much. Like with focus, I could center focus point, D9 setting, and then just focus recompose, and that would work 90% of the time. Whereas this camera, I know the Z7 and the Z6 have both gotten a lot of flack for how terrible the autofocus system is. I used to always leave my DSLRs in autofocus continuous mode, which I don't find particularly reliable on this camera. But AFS mode is incredible. It just snaps on and it's accurate and consistent and reliable. The pinpoint autofocus mode I haven't figured out yet. I haven't had any good luck with that at all. So I've been using a lot of the the wide and extra wide modes. I find they're really quick, really easy, work well with the touchscreen and the focus points. But I'll run into situations where I might try to focus on something that's up close, and it just refuses to lock on. It just stays on in the background. But then when I adjust the focus point, it snaps better than the D600 ever did. You have to switch and adjust things more often than I did on my old camera. But as a result of doing that, the results I do get are significantly better. I'm wondering if it's a case of just, I'm gonna have to retrain myself to be one with this new focus system. Because this system, I don't use the 3D matrix metering fancy read my brain mode. I just want a dumb box so I can predict and I know what's going to happen. For low light focusing, it will land focus very quickly, far more reliably, and in situations where my D600 just doesn't land focus. I've not tried the low light autofocus mode yet. I might experiment with that in the near future. With a DSLR, this on-off switch don't think of it as an on-off switch, think of it as a button lock so it doesn't click on your bag. I've left my DSLRs turned on in my camera bag for 3 or 4 months at a time, and when I find them, there's still plenty of battery. They're just as good to go as they were the day I recharge and put the battery back in. Whereas with this camera, again, it's very obvious that it's a digital device, a signal processing device. It is power hungry. Recharging the batteries is kind of one of those things that has to be every time I use it, battery in the charger. Where with this guy, I could just toss it back in the camera bag and, maybe, at the end of the week charge the battery or something, because I could get a good 2,000 shots. Also with my third-party knockoff batteries not working with the Z6, that kind of makes that awareness in the back of my head very obvious. But the biggest difference that I've noticed is there's something that I like to call mental load, and that's how much stuff you have to keep track of. Coming from a film, all analog background, there's quite a lot of mental load, because not only do you have to make sure that you've nailed the subject and got it in focus, but you also have to adjust the correct exposure and position yourself. It's quite a lot of mental load. When you're just starting, there's the technicals of getting the device to work. And then once you've mastered that, there's composition, there's the formal elements of image making. And then once you get to that, you can get to things like, creating a cohesive body of work where you're telling a larger story through multiple photos, or you're putting a show together. There's things like a potentially narrative or a concept. What's the message or the thing you're trying to convey? And I find that you're kind of dragged back by the technical. I think the easiest example is when you're shooting night night photography, the human eye is not very sensitive to color and low light. So when you're shooting scenes like urban photography at night, you get all these beautiful colors from the various urban lights. And when you're looking through the optical viewfinder, you see a kind of a dark, dreary image. It's very hard, I find, to imagine exactly what all the photo settings, you know, what's the sky going to look like? What's this going to look like? What's that going to look like? Or with the EVF, I'm seeing exactly what I'm going to be getting. So that part of the mental load is just gone. All the mental effort that would be focused on that element can go towards formal elements or go towards a concept. It's like it eases a big burden off that mental load. However, I've mentioned things like the crop with ADL, or how certain features like ADL or ADL lighting don't work in, you know, or will only work in manual exposure mode. Like, you have little things like that that you have to keep in your mind, like remembering to turn the IBIS off when you have it on a tripod. That's all part of the mental load. So it introduces those elements, but there's so many more that it takes away. I really was expecting to be a grumpy old man who wasn't willing to deal with change, but yeah, EVFs are awesome. Plus the histogram. It's like you don't even have to worry about exposure when you have the histogram. You get that peak, get it to look like that. That's all you got to do. Another thing I've noticed, it's kind of weird with the EVF though, is there's certain situations where I don't know if it's the resolution of the EVF not being quite high or just the fact that I need glasses and refuse to wear them, but I'll have situations where I'm looking through an image and I'm trying to get it to focus and it looks a little bit soft and I'm lazy, so I'll just take the picture and move on. And then when I look at the pictures later on, they are perfect. So yeah, that's an area where I'm running into some interesting stuff, is just not quite trusting this camera yet. There's a few little tricks that I've done that I find helpful. Like I turn on the zebra stripes in video mode. I've set up the record button to be the 200% zoom in on photo mode, which is really handy. It does lead to a lot of accidental recordings when I'm in video mode instead though, but one of the things I wasn't expecting to be an issue, but it bugged me when I'm going around at night taking pictures. This rear light on the Z6 will stay on. I find I'm having to use that display mode button to go to prioritize viewfinder when I'm out shooting at night. I don't know why I'm holding my D600 as if it was the Z6. I'm sure I'm going to get at least one comment about that. Who am I kidding? No one watches these. It sounds small and silly, but I did find it bothersome, so you might want to try prioritize viewfinder when you're going around shooting. Especially if you're using a neck strap, because I find if you have a jacket on and it's sort of swinging and your jacket's there, it was just going enough to hit the little sensor for the EVF, which would cause the screens to stay on the entire time I was walking. So I'd come home from a 2-hour walk and the battery would just be with 1 bar remaining. So yeah, prioritize viewfinder solves that problem. I'm not really testing this camera for everything. I'm just comparing it against the D600, which is the camera that I used to have, so I know where my equipment's at. I've explored every nook and cranny of this thing. I know what I can do with it, so I'd like to see how much further I can push this camera. I'm mostly there. Got a couple more things coming up. The wheels and dials feel spectacular on this thing. I think that might be my favorite part of the camera. It sounds silly, but when you're on those websites reading the stats and it's all you know, this many megapixels, this much ISO, this much performance, this many stops, that's important, and ultimately that's what the audience is ultimately going to see. But there's also just how it feels while using it, and those dials feel good. And you know, I find if you hate the tools that you're working with, you're not going to be that motivated to go out and use them. So you want to pick tools that you love. And of the camera brands, I've always, well, since the switch to digital, I've just found that Nikon designs tend to fit my hands best. That might not be the right choice for you, but give it a shot. You know, it's their first generation and it's a serious contender.